Hi, I'm Danger Dan Jers, the host and GM of the D&D Real Play podcast, D&D Dark. Join us on Wednesdays for an absurd, over-the-top comedy horror adventure, starring some of history's most infamous monsters.
I'm Ben Magnet. I play Mary Frankenstein, our barbarian.
I am Daniel Cruz. I am playing Imhotep the Mummy, our cleric.
I'm Jordan, and I play Larry Talbot, a lycanthropic warlock.
I am Grayson, playing Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man, the party's rogue.
I am Aaron. I play the Phantom of the Opera, our bard.
For more information, go to dndarkpodcast.com and listen to us anywhere you find podcasts.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to SideQuest, your high-octane distraction from those other podcasts. We're a pen and paper RPG audio show featuring chatter about rules and how to master them, epic world building, player investment, and interviews with the people who make the games you love. Listen in as we trade tabletop war stories and make judgment calls on odd situations, and do everything we can to give you more RPG resources than you could dream of, all from a simple SideQuests. I'm Paladin of Podcast Rob, and we got the other Paladins today. Go ahead and announce yourselves, guys.
Hi, I'm Paladin Eli.
And I remain Craig.
It's nice to know you haven't changed, Greg.
Now there's deeper philosophy for us.
Before we get too much into that, we were just talking and we decided to jump right into the episode because I had an endgame idea for my new campaign, and we decided I can probably talk about it without spilling the beans on this because I had a logistics thing that I debated. And I like my idea. So the thought was to put it in like a manila envelope and place it on my large map that I have next to our gaming table. That way the players know that Endgame is there. It hasn't changed. It's not removed, and they can constantly see it. Just an air of curiosity, knowing that there is a end insight. It's not just an open sandbox style game. Well, it is, but it's not forever.
Just to ask a few clarifying questions, when you put it on the map, is it going to be where the end game is going to be? Like, are you putting it in a certain spot so the players are like, oh, wow, if we go there, we know the game is ending?
No, it would just be there so they could see it. It wouldn't be a location specific. Not to mention, my manila envelopes are pretty large comparatively to the map too. So
you're looking to put a physical object on the board to let your players know, hey, this is a thing. This exists. It's immutable. What do you want them to take away from that? Why do you think that it's gonna make them more excited to know that this is like an existing thing?
That way they kind of have the idea that not only is the game itself rather planned out, which it's not super planned, but it's planned out enough where I've got milestones and events, things that happen that are going to be exciting. It gives them something to really look forward to see how it ends. Not in the sense of winning, but in the sense of reaching the conclusion of this epic story that we're all telling.
What are you going to do if they break it?
Yeah.
Like if I got to change the end game?
Yeah.
Well, does it...
got it in the envelope now.
You know what?
Yeah, does it feel railroady?
Oh, absolutely. I just kick them out. If they don't want to play my game, screw them. I'm just joking. That is not my actual philosophy at all, ever. No, so if it goes a different route, what I'm thinking is whether they participate in the end game itself or not, the choices that I have sort of laid down, one of them would happen regardless of their participation. So that choice would be made for them.
So it sounds like this. No, go for it, Eli.
Is it a little railroady to put the end game down Like, are you concerned at all about that? I know some players and some tables are very concerned about being railroaded. Putting the end game on the table might.
I understand the concern. I myself, no, not super concerned because the end game isn't necessarily like I just said. Even if they don't participate, there's still a story element that's going to go on. In my world, there are still other heroes that function in the world. There are quests and things that are essentially time based. If they don't get to it in time, they miss the opportunity to do so. So I very much consider it. I'm not pushing them into a specific path. Like this is just kind of the end chapter, and it's the main points. How they get there, what they do with it is all still up to them. Those are just the elements in place.
So before we started recording here, you actually told us what this was, and I think out of concern for not spoiling it for your players, we're not mentioning it on the actual podcast. But it's a major event. It's something that would be momentous, campaign changing.
Yes.
A big damn deal. I think you could change slightly what you're talking about and still give it just as much impact, and perhaps dodge the risk of a player being like, well, if the ending's already figured out, then like, what does anything we're doing matter? And I think when the players find out what that situation is and they become aware that this consequence is possible, that's when you put it out. And then rather than being like, this is how this is going to end no matter what you do, they can look at that and see, oh, and label it like consequences for this action coming to pass. And they know that like, okay, that's a different context for what could happen. And maybe they become focused on saying, oh man, like we gotta stop that from happening, or not, as they see fit.
Sure. I like that. Yeah, Eli.
I really like that addition as well, just because putting the end game on the table, it feels like it's a good resource for the players to have to be on the map. But if it doesn't actually interact with the map or the players in any real way, it doesn't really add much information. Well, right? Because like if it's on the map and it points to a location, then the players know, when we enter that area, end game. Or if it had some sort of time element or something where you like put check marks on it, and anything like that, gives the players a sense of it's coming.
I could definitely see that. Like I said, the idea of just putting it on the map, because it's in the manila envelope, is just so it's in eyesight. We don't pull the map down very often, but it's got a magnetic backing to it, so we could pull it down and put magnetic trackers on it if we wanted to.
For our listeners at home here, this is a map that has been attached to the wall, so it's more like, there's the reference for the is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So what I've done for the listeners, I got the map printed. I attached it to a thin gauge of metal, and it's attached to the wall via magnets. And I can pull it off the wall, put it on the table. And we can use magnetic city markers, placement markers, or if there was a large-scale war, troop markers, etc., home base markers, with town names, etc., if we wanted to.
That's a versatile prop. That's pretty cool, actually.
That was a lot of forethought, actually. It took me a while to think about all that. But yeah, the idea was to give the players an opportunity to essentially set, I don't want to say set waypoints, but one of my biggest gripes with a lot of gaming is travel time. Like, I don't want to spend 6 months traveling between two locations and there's 4 encounters. I'll just fast travel. So having set points between locations, we break for fights, encounters, and then within one session, we've made 6 months worth of travel. Having those waypoints helps give them a physical location on the scale.
That's cool. I've turned my mind toward maps recently as well, actually. I've been putting one together for a game that I'll be starting to run on Saturdays. Session 0 is this weekend, so I'm pretty stoked.
Good.
And
that's the one you shared in our chat, right?
Yeah. I hand drew it, and then I scanned it, and then I started putting some color in with paint.net.
I like the way that turned out, honestly.
It looks kind of gnarly, but like I'm there for it. It's been... With so many high touch art resources available for campaigns, so much stuff on the internet, you can unconsciously or sort of not you can start defaulting to the thought that like, oh, if this doesn't look like a professional artist put it together, it's not good enough. And it's easy to forget that sort of kitchen table aesthetic of like, yeah, I drew this together. It's on like lined notebook paper with a pencil,
Mm-hmm.
because
I love
that
it.
plays the thing. Sorry, say again.
I love it because it feels like a good like a map that a character might start with, because it doesn't have an enormous amount of details, but it's got everything really important on it.
We'll
all
put a
the
link to
major
it.
Features.
We'll put a link to it in the description of this episode. It shouldn't be hard. It's just on Imager. But yeah, no, so the map is a line drawing. It's really simple. Rivers are a single line on there. It's got a scale on it, but it's pretty rough. And if there's a forest, there's a couple of trees there. It's not like laboriously illustrated like a manuscript. And it's just got light forest written on it, that kind of thing. Major cities are pulled out. But I've been using this as I set up my online table space, and like I've overlaid a hex map onto it. And suddenly it's like, okay, cool. Like now we know how long it'll take to travel certain ways. Like that extra layer of detail is on there. It's weighing on me a lot. It's been a while since I've done this much at the beginning of a campaign. I was hoping you guys actually could have some advice for me on that front.
I'm really curious to see what Eli has to say.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, we'll give you advice.
My God.
I'm really curious.
Ship the episode. We're done here.
But I was also going to ask, since at some point, since Rob had talked about he just had a brilliant idea for the end game of his campaign, do you have an end game prepared or planned for this game that you have coming up?
For my thing, absolutely not. And that's why it came to mind, because I very explicitly do not have one. So I've run a bunch of pre-written stuff before. Over the past couple of years, I've trended a lot toward taking adventures that are pre-written, not full-on adventure paths, where 6-part extravaganzas, but a dungeon here, a plot here, and running those and putting my own spin on them. But what I'm trying with this campaign is a sandbox campaign. I'm using Worlds Without Number, which is an excellent system by an excellent author. And there's a free version too. So if you like what you hear me talking about, go for it.
Well, we can link that in the description too for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. There's a free version on DriveThruRPG. It's good times. But it's explicitly a sandbox campaign. I don't know what the plot is going to be, and that's sort of what my struggle has been to get this thing set up. So, on one hand, it's an original setting. It's my campaign world, and I have to figure out how to walk the line between not having enough prepared, which means that the players don't have enough context to make characters that understand the context that they're in and have their own goals, versus writing the Silmarillion for a setting that nobody cares about yet and drowning my players in exposition and info dumping them.
I once I'm not just going to say once. Let me be very specific here. when I went to Gen Con this past year, so 2022, and I sat down for a seminar by Alphinius Gu, who runs GUI Cube and whatnot. He told me and the entire audience something very specific that is absolutely true in my opinion. Lore is for the dungeon master. It's something that the players enjoy, but it's truly for us as dungeon masters. We create pages upon pages that they're never going to read, that they're never going to see, and it builds our world that we can introduce them to. It's for us. That's all it is. So if you want to write it. It's for you.
There's a line in the Worlds Without Number book, and this is a through line through a lot of Kevin Crawford's stuff, the author, which is essentially like, look, if you're writing material that you're not going to use in your next session, and he says this in the context of a sandbox campaign, but it generally applies, I think. If you're writing material that you're not going to use in the next session, you are not writing campaign material. You are world building. If you're having fun, great, but if you only have 2 hours to prep for your game, you're not using them correctly. That's me paraphrasing. That's not a literal quote.
I understand.
Like
you look at you dig it?
Yeah, I mean, I for a sandbox campaign, I agree.
Okay.
So when I talk about, oh no, go for it.
I do feel like if you're doing something that's like a hex crawl, which I feel like that might fall under sandbox, I do feel like there is a certain amount of prep work that's required just to start a hex crawl, like to populate enough hexes uh, that the players can interact with. So I do think that while that might not be in the next session, it is still vital.
I think that even with something like that, so my session zero, toward the thing you just said, the session zero that I'm planning on running is only partially going to be material that I'm presenting. I was freaking out about this. I was talking to my wife. I was like, she's one of my players actually, and I was like, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I have enough stuff. And she, in her sublime way, encouraged me to chill the hell out. But that conversation reminded me that it's not all like I'm not getting on stage and performing necessarily. That first session zero is going to be a conversation where it's like, okay, hey, here's some of the stuff I've come up with. What about that is interesting to you? This is a conversation. And that session zero is not just here's the context, it's what direction do you want me to write more things in? Because without the players answering that, then no matter what I do, probably isn't going to be useful that next session.
I found a simple, easy way to kind of help me with that in particular. You guys can do the same. In fact, I want to say it's kind of like an evolution of both of your guys' ideas because I've taken so many of them for this game. On the wall, I also have my whiteboard, and in that whiteboard, I've got two big blank spaces. One of them says current goals, and one of them says future goals. Right now, they don't have anything in the future goal. They just got current goals to figure out. And we ask at the end of every session, hey, what are your current goals that you want to do? And what are the future goals that you want to figure out? And what that is for me is it tells me what to write for. They're essentially planning the game, and I'm just responding to their answers.
So, Craig,
Hello?
what are your goals for this campaign? Do you want to get them to a specific level? Do you want to have them explore a certain aspect that you've drawn out here on this map? What are you introducing to your campaign world that you want them to interact with? Or do you have any strong themes that you want in this campaign?
I hope to have an answer to that after that session zero. I think that I've got a bunch of stuff already written up. I stayed up really late over the last couple of nights, and I was really hammering it out. It takes place in a corner of the world where there are three borders. It's called the tripartite border, and it's where three countries butt up against each other. And it's after a major it's about 20 years after a major catastrophe, so people are partially recovered, but not completely. And it's a bit of a Wild West thing. What I'm mostly interested in is finding out how the players decide to get involved with the various factions that I've put together and what they do when they're turned loose on here. One of the first things that we're going to do is trying to figure out what goals are going to drive you. I am most excited for this campaign because I have no idea what direction it may go. Once I know which way they're pointing and they start walking there, then I start generating stuff. But I don't have a theme in mind. It could be a lot of stuff. If they decide to go to one of the cities and really get stuck in with the factions there, it could turn into an intrigue game. If they say, okay, we know that there are a bunch of ruins that we want to delve around here from, the departed empire, then yeah, we could go more heavily into dungeon crawling. Likely it'll be a bunch of all of that. They could wander off into the desolation of the imperial diaspora, and it could turn into a weird exploration of the Wild West Mad Max kind of thing.
I say roll with it like that. I mean, if they continuously give you goals, ideas, and enough to work off of, I think it's decent. And then I think that also plays into what you had mentioned earlier with your paraphrasing of the quote. If you got 2 hours to plan and you're not writing for the session, you're world building. And see, my problem is I generally world build. I can roll into a campaign session with absolutely zero prepared and make it work. Which is generally how I do it, by the way. In fact, I think I showed you one of my session 1 notes from one of my big games that I've done. And I mean, there was everything from start to end. The entire session was pretty much laid out as though it was an adventure module. Whereas this time, it's all fits on a single page of paper. So I went from 30 hours to planning session one to 2 hours. But my game is different. I'm going a different route this way. So I think it depends on what, like Eli had mentioned, what you want to do, your goals. Sorry, I hit the microphone. You're using a lot of player interest as well, which is what I've done. So that takes a lot of the work I do out of it.
Do you have a duration that you want to play this game, Craig? Like, is it a time level just until the group fades?
Well, I'm very fond of these people, and I mean I married one, and I think that this is a group. This isn't a group that's going to like dissolve as soon as this particular campaign ends at some point in the future. I think we'll probably move on to like some other game, maybe even revisit the setting, after some number of interstitial campaigns. The system that we're using only goes up to level 10. That's the apex of achievement. I mean, there are some non-level things that you could increase in terms of power, but at that point it becomes a very different kind of game. You've sort of gone from... One way I once heard Pathfinder described, and in some ways D&D 5th edition as well, is that the level ranges are essentially blood and guts Game of Thrones from 1 to 5 or so, and then from roughly 5 to 10 it becomes more like the Fellowship of the Ring, and then from 10 to 15 or so you get Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and then from 15 to 20 plus it becomes a Marvel movie.
Yeah, that's the XP slog right there. That's
but just in terms of like character power and capabilities,
yeah.
This is decidedly on the bottom end of that section. I'm curious if the campaign naturally reaches an endpoint where they do hit maximum level, where they're like, our personal powers as far as we can go as mortals is done. And maybe they'll be like, yeah, my character retires. That's it. We're happy. We're settled in. Or maybe they'll be like, no, we want to keep going. But I expect that that'll be months away.
So I'm excited to hear about this session 0.
Serially not answering your questions. Like, what do you plan? Oh man. And then I just sort of exhale a sparkling cloud and run away. So sorry.
Oh, that's great. I mean, we've all approached this in different ways. I mean, how many campaigns have we run individually? Collectively, it's...
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. So all three of us approach it differently. And still interested to see Eli to answer the question, like, how would you really go about it?
Eli, how do you split the difference between getting your players prepped with enough context to make characters versus info dumping them?
I think a key... Well, I offer all of my players the option to write backstories for their characters and earn XP. And usually that's more of a conversation. So where they'll send me something or they'll talk to me about their character's backstory. And then I'll kind of have a conversation back and forth about where that might be set or where that comes from. And then I offer them resources where they can find more information about those things.
When you're running, is there like a Hackmaster default setting, or do you have a custom campaign world?
There is a Hackmaster default setting.
When they're making those characters, is that information about the setting available to them? Or do you sort of give them a resource on like, hey, here's what you know about the local area? Or is it like, the book's there, read what you want, give me something?
A little bit of both. I am, if a player ever has a question about a certain area, I usually try to answer it and then also send them the source whenever they ask a question, so that my players are pretty good about just reading or checking it out, or if they hear something interesting, they'll dig into it. So I'm a little spoiled in that sense. And my players are all they've very much gotten into trying to role play their characters, and trying to, because Hackmaster has a semi randomish character generation, so you can kind of end up with some odd character traits, and so it's really about like stepping into the character that you generate. And they're great at doing that.
I can see how a process that ends up with you more discovering your character rather than creating them in some ways can sidestep some of these issues. Where they may be like, oh, okay, I had a noble family and they sent me off to live with somebody else. Well, all right, who are the nobles around here? What are they like? Like that immediately asks the question just by rolling it. So, maybe I'll use some life path stuff. I love life path stuff.
There's a light life path resource in the Hackmaster where you roll for the legitimacy of your birth and if your parents loved you or not.
Oh my god.
If your parents either love you and you get like more character points, they're indifferent, they weren't great, and you lose character points, or you can even get like quirks and flaws from your parents if they're abusive. And then you also roll like for like your relationship with each of your siblings. So you kind of like you can kind of just get a general gist of a backstory there, which is usually just enough to kickstart a backstory.
There's a game that I have read but never played directly, although I've taken stuff from it, and I believe I'm gonna mess this name up. It's either called The Nightmares Below or The Nightmares Underneath. I'm gonna Google it real quick because I want to get it right.
Well, you're doing that quick Google as we're talking about character background stories and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a free document by Brian Jameson called Game Mastering. And he's got a really cool section on character building, and he approaches it very simply as a lot of systems utilize a random generator. So if you're not using a random generator, don't consider it rolling up a character, but building a character, because that's what you're doing. You're building your character as a player. And I agree with that system. It's something I try to look at and look into. I will see if I can also put that link in the description. It's going to be a link-heavy episode.
So it's called The Nightmares Underneath. It's by Cathan Stone Games. And it's super cool. It's worth but it's worth checking out. But the thing that comes to mind here in terms of like life path stuff is that it's one of the only games I've ever seen where you roll for your starting socioeconomic class. And it's a 3d6 roll. Which means, people are going to be in that middle of the road social class as often as they would roll, probably about a 9, 10, 11, or 12 on their stats on a 3d6. So kind of most of the time. Very low and very high status characters are commensurately rare. But every single one of those results then has its own 3d6 chart for starting gear. And all of them are interesting because some of them are like, okay, you start with armor, a polearm, a bag of expensive drugs, and a loyal dog, all of which are stolen. And it's like figure it out. That's a major way to figure out like what is your character circumstances and how do they end up with this. I used it when I was doing my Stonehell Mega Dungeon campaign to immediately just be like, boom, here's some inputs for your new character. Figure it out. But like it wasn't just like haha everyone's it doesn't matter whether you're a prince or a pauper, like you're still a grubby adventurer. Like it actually matters if you come from a noble family, and because like now all your stuff is nice and that kind of thing. So
I
don't know.
Absolutely love charts.
Yeah, no, it's good fun. Actually, I think I may have put that specific chart on a Google Doc sheet to automatically roll it. Hold on.
Nice. Nice. I've been getting into a lot of, I don't want to say like random chart books or random tables, but I've gotten quite a few of the settlement books, town books, shop books, innkeeper books, things just for additional ideas and resources lately.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, tomorrow I should be getting character backstory and world building books for my players, along with a new game. I'm excited about this one.
What do you got?
Shit, I gotta be able to pronounce this right. Symbaroum.
Symbaroum. Oh, I've heard of this one. That's the
I've not.
The like grim and gritty fantasy setting. Is that it?
Yeah, grim. It's very, very grim dark.
Okay.
I don't know a shit ton about it. Otherwise, well, I'll read the description real quick because people are not going to not know how to spell it, but they're not going to know what we're talking about. Um, the acclaimed Swedish role-playing game explore the vast forest of Davakar and the hunt for treasure, lost wisdom, and eternal fame. The barbarian clans to trade or to plunder their treasures, establish a base of power among princes, guilds, or rebellious refugees in the capital city of Yandros, or survive encounters with the arch trolls, dark-minded blight beasts, and undead warlords. But whatever you do, never ignore the warnings spoken by the wardens of the forest. Tread carefully and do not disturb the ruins of old, for the dark deep of Davakar is about to awaken. Made in Sweden.
All right. Are you planning on running it straight out of the book, or are you just going to scrape it for ideas? What's up?
I got no idea yet. Since I picked up Morkborg, I've really been into a lot of horror style games too, and I'm trying to kind of glean what I can from how they're set up, especially different systems. One I'm really looking forward to is the Old Gods of Appalachia, by Monty Cook Games.
It might just be because I am a scaredy cat. I cannot run horror games. I've tried to run a few of them. Just can't do it.
Horror games require a suspension of belief that everybody has to sort of prescribe to. Like they got to be like, "Yep, I will believe that this is possible." So,
what about running horror is difficult for you, Eli? Or rather, what horror games have you tried to run and then found difficult, and why do you think it was?
I've ran some Call of Cthulhu games. I've ran some Aliens. I've also just tried to run various other games with a darker twist. Like trying to run D&D in a horror style campaign. And I think I just don't think I can convey that sense of like impending dread and doom and gloom just because I am too cheery of a person. I just don't feel like I can bring that mood into the table without spoiling it, maybe? I don't know. Can't keep this smile off my face.
I think that'd be
you could
interesting.
just sit there and smile at them ear to ear consistently the entire session. That's a different kind of horror.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah, that would work. Yeah, I've just never been able to quite pull it off. So,
Now,
I'm open to all suggestions.
Do you think you're not able to pull it off, or do you think your players think you're not able to pull it off?
I don't know if I am able to pull it off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I don't want to pigeonhole you too much, but when I think of your GMing, I think of you running Hackmaster. And
Yes, sir.
Hackmaster, as I understand it, is incredibly lethal. Right?
Yeah, it is very lethal.
Well, that's a kind of horror in and of itself. I mean, maybe the game uses terminology that, is lighthearted, or, it's easy to roll up a new character, so that's the end of it. But I think the kind of games that we play here, where we're, going into dark places in the earth and, scrounging them for treasure against these horrible things that can quite literally, rip the characters apart in a couple of seconds. If you look at it in a certain light, that's terrifying. I think you've got a lot more in your quiver here than you give yourself credit for. One of the things that I am not an expert in running horror games, but I like to think that I do okay. I try not to do gross out stuff where it's just gore and descriptions and like making people queasy. I mean, I can do it, and I have to stop myself because my limits are not what other people's limits are. But when I have done something that I thought was successfully scary, every single time it played with the idea of the unknown. When the players think, oh yeah, goblins, whatever, like this is a comedy scene, we can kick their asses and that's what's going on. But the instant I introduce an enemy or a monster or a threat that's brand new, that they don't know what it is, especially if it's like, oh, that's an ogre, but it's got two heads, like, oh, all right, whatever, or it's a troll, but it's immune to ice this time, like that's not what I'm talking about. When I'm like, this thing looks like somebody tied 3 eels in a knot, and it's not crawling on the ceiling, but it seems like gravity affects it in a different way. And And when it screams, your nose starts bleeding. Like, oh my god! Like what the hell? Yeah, it just burrowed straight into the earth, and it didn't leave a hole behind it. All of a sudden, they're extremely panicked. I just made it up on the spot. You can get a lot of mileage in terms of horror with something fairly simple that's just not obvious, that's not familiar to the players. I know Halloween has just passed here, but you don't like in a good horror movie, you don't show the monster until later in the much later, like the third act.
20 minutes before the credits roll.
Yeah. If you show it immediately, it's like, okay, this isn't a horror movie anymore. This is an action movie because now it's a bug hunt,
Mm-hmm.
I think that might literally be the difference between like Alien and Aliens, that sort of philosophical approach. I've run Mothership. Mothership RPG, as written, is a sci-fi horror game. I think I've recommended it before, and I'll recommend it again. There's really good advice in there in terms of how to do this kind of stuff.
I'll have to check it out.
It's real good stuff.
See, I found when I'm doing horror things, my best bet is to really get incredibly descriptive with the surroundings, because anytime most players look at combat, they're just looking at slugfests, HP sponges, and stand around, beat the shit out of one thing, and move on. So I have to set up the environment. I don't necessarily think about placing them in it, but I have to give them enough to visualize essentially the desolation or the destruction that they are witnessing and seeing, the horrors or the sounds, the smells, the sights that are going to affect them the most. So sometimes in cases like I won't even tell them to roll anything. I'm just going to give them certain bits of information. And then how I present that, whether it be tone of voice, inflection, how fast I speak, how slow, that all sets the stage for the immersion, which helps. I think if you can nail that, it can really cut down on the work you feel like you have to do. Other than that, I think you can probably stick to other common tropes and get away with it.
That's not a problem if you're like, nah, horror's not for me.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It also has been some time since I've tried to introduce any horror style elements into some of my games, so it might just be also something that I need to I'll just keep taking whacks at it. But I'll read some Mothership.
Allow me to suggest something specific.
Yeah.
Mothership RPG is great, but specifically, there's a pamphlet adventure. It's literally on a trifold pamphlet. You can read it in 20 minutes. It's called The Haunting of Ypsilon 14. Check out Mothership. Try to run Ypsilon 14 as a one shot, and I think you will learn something about how you approach this kind of stuff. It's super good. I've run it before. Actually, not even using Mothership, and it worked out.
Oh, I'll check it out.
Actually, to the point that one of my players was like, "Please don't run any more horror."
Nice. I like to generally run Grimdark. So we're right on that edge of horror. We can teeter back and forth, but it's never sunny. So it's kind of one of those
I can't do cruelty. I can't have my villains be cruel. It's really, really difficult for me. It's important because the villains, have to be worth defeating. But I realized I default toward natural forces. I'll default towards, zombies or the undead or like robots or traps or that kind of stuff. And in this case, basically zombies and robots are essentially the same thing in a fantasy setting.
Like how you say natural things like zombies.
Yeah. Or rather stuff that doesn't have volition, that essentially is running on its own programming rather than a person who's like, yeah, I could choose to be kind or I could choose to be merciful, and instead I am choosing to be terrible, to be cruel. I'm bad at it. It does not come naturally to me. It's why I try to lean on a lot of random generator systems to be like, okay, given this, like what would this character do here? Even if I write the chart myself and do it, it gets over that hump of like, well, he'll hire somebody else to do it for him or something like that. I don't know.
Giving your villains some sort of decision tree when the players do something can help you do merciless actions.
Yeah, no. Well, okay. So like specifically choosing to be terrible when you could choose to pursue a goal without the cruelty to it. I'm bad at doing that.
What if you try to flip that?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, instead of the idea of doing something like to obtain a goal, but being cruel to do it, what if they went the opposite way? For example, I have a bad guy who is technically a good guy, but he's so good that he's bad. He has pushed being good so far to the extreme that the ends ultimately justify the means. And he no longer practices the ideologies of a good character, but his good beliefs have pushed him to lawful evil, essentially.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to push for the idea of cruelty. You can just continuously say that, I am doing this for you. The highly overprotective father, like the incredibly stout and defensive master who takes the one good lesson and pushes it so far that it's suffocating. It becomes entrapping. It's disfiguring. It's decimating.
I get you. I think that works. I think that if you've got solid motivations for your characters, your villains especially, then you don't need to think about it like, how do I do evil here? It's like, well, they want this and they're willing to sacrifice basically anything to get there. So even if it means many people need to suffer to accomplish it, that's justified in their eyes. And there's a villain with a motivation who's causing harm by their actions. And you don't have to think like, I will torture, yes.
Well, Thanos from Marvel. he wasn't incredibly cruel. He had a very specific mission, and he truthfully did it rather painlessly overall. So, one of those things, a thought. So
it will be interesting to see, especially in this upcoming campaign, sort of who or what emerges as an antagonist to the players. I like the idea of them having made discrete choices that end up putting them either in favor with or at odds with other entities that exist, and what sort of rises to the top, and who could be an ally or an enemy or either one or both at different points of the campaign.
Are you restricting your party in any form of like morals or alignment or race, class, anything like that?
So I generally don't bother with alignment. I end up finding that it ends up being really restrictive. I just personally don't enjoy using it because, Worlds Without Number doesn't even have it, for one. It's not a mechanic. But I just generally find that it's just not the interesting part of the game for me. There's not really a restriction here in terms of races or classes. Worlds Without Number only has 3 base classes, actually: warrior, expert, and mage. It has a bunch of different flavors of several of those, and there's technically a 4th class called adventurer, which is taking half of 2 of those other 3 classes. So you end up with many variations, but those are the fundamental ideas. So you can put together a wide variety of character concepts. Crawford just put out an expansion book called Atlas of the Latter Earth that actually has a bunch more setting stuff for the sort of default setting, but also a large number of other classes as well. By popular demand, he essentially put together a warlock class in there, in terms of like the 5e or the 5e or 3.5e warlock style thing. So I'm sure I can think of at least one player who's going to be like, that's my guy. Why do you ask about those kinds of character generation restrictions?
I was just interested in if you knew the party was going to pursue a good aligned campaign, or if they were going to go down a way of evil. Kind of, there are some people that do like no evil characters and that sort of thing. So I was just kind of curious.
For these folks, so it's always going to vary by the players. Once you know them, I don't think after the session 0 we're going to be like, yeah, you're going to play a bunch of bastards. Like, it's not going to be that kind of game. I would be really surprised if they did. I probably wouldn't tell them no, but I would have to sort of turn some dials in my head for it. The campaign setting as it exists is pretty human dominant. There are a few elves and dwarves, but they're not exactly standard fantasy elves and dwarves. Elves in the setting are basically artistic savants that had been more or less enslaved by the Empire to be sort of in-house artists on demand because they don't survive on food. They actually perpetuate their immortality by creating new things. And so that was the deal that they had worked out at the time. The Empire has since vanished, and so now these elves are kind of free to wander around. Dwarves have a kind of similar thing going on, but nobody's really played a dwarf yet in any game I've run for this setting, which is kind of surprising. Orcs exist. I don't do half orcs. Orcs exist. They explicitly come from another dimension, and they were the hired shock troops of the Empire. And now there's no more Empire, and there are a whole lot of orc soldiers who still have families and clans and various interests. So it's going to be sort of this. I don't have halflings. I never know what the hell to do with them, and whenever anything bad happens to them, I always feel terrible. And I don't really understand why gnomes are still around. They just sort of confuse me. It feels like somebody put the dial between a halfling and a dwarf and sort of walked away. So if you guys have any idea why gnomes exist, I help me out here.
How much do you know about folklore and mythology in the real world?
A gratuitous and embarrassing amount. For gnomes though, I meant like their place in the D&D milieu.
My gnomes are
Just
always heavily influenced by Dragonlance gnomes.
Okay.
Like the Tinker Gnome thing?
Yeah, like the Tinker Gnome thing. Those gnomes, and it might be because that was some of like the first like kind of fantasy novels that I got into with some Dragonlance stuff. But I really always loved that kind of gnome niche of just a little bit, like not all the screws are quite there, but they are like willing to try pretty much anything.
How I do my
Rob,
gnomes
what were
generally.
you going to talk about in terms of folklore?
Well, when we look at the history of a lot of different gnomes from around the world, we can see that they are specifically stolen from, I want to say Middle European. Emojis on the screen. Middle European gnome folklore. So they're generally mischievous. They're generally, as Eli said, they're willing to do or try anything, tricksters, etc. I'm strongly of the opinion that when they were essentially stolen for D&D, the idea was to give players the option for something small, something nimble, and a trickster style character. Because that's kind of where they fit, and that's sort of their real world history. So,
I never had a real gnome stan show up at any of my parties.
it's all right.
Maybe they're a painted elf.
I have one. The person that makes all that beautiful art for all my games runs a gnome named Basil Ganglia.
Basil Ganglia.
Yep. And that gnome also has the artistry skill, and so often he draws a lot of he'll draw stuff themselves and then be like, oh, this is what Basil drew in their notebook. He also likes to use like the art skill to try to like do different searches. So instead of like looking for a trap door by like searching for it, instead they'll try to do detailed sketches and see if their attention to detail can help get something odd in their drawing.
That's a unique approach. It's just like, oh, is there a trap there? Well, I'm sketching the room. I'll let you know when I see a part that looks like a trap. Like, is that how that works?
Yeah,
Nice.
like I mean, usually it's not for like. Sometimes they look for secret doors using it, but yeah, it usually takes a lot longer to make a check like that. But it adds like another. What's fun was when they'll use the artistry skill a number of times, and then like depending on how well they rolled when they draw something later, it'll have those like if they rolled badly to draw one character but well on another, that one character will be drawn very badly, and then
who's the stick figure? He's the mayor. He's not important. Don't worry about it.
yeah.
I like that. That's funny. I like that. All right. Well, we're pushed up against the 45 time mark, guys. anything that we want to have some closing remarks, ideas, thoughts, questions, something that we want to hear from the audience if they ever respond to us.
Go Seahawks.
Nice. Way to end it. All right, guys. Thanks for checking out Side Quests today. Again, we'll get some of those links posted up in the description below. So if you made it this far, don't forget to check out the description if you don't read them till the end anyway. Otherwise, check us out at epictablegames.com or on Facebook.